All right, Rick, if you want to get started, just kind of talk a little bit about yourself and your background, we can get going.
Okay, and let's leave it kind of loose so that if anybody has any questions, I know we're going to take them at the end. But if you have anything during my chat, please pipe in because I'm pretty relaxed as far as talking about what I do and working with athletes and whatnot. Um, well, I started my kind of my background. My undergraduate degree is actually in agriculture, so I did a lot of work with plant science, plant-based compounds in my early years, and then I was in college at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and I got an MBA also from the same school. I was still in track and field. I was a hammer thrower, and I was competing, and so I stayed at Cal Poly and got my second degree there. Then I actually started in retail uh, out of college a little bit, and wound up managing some very large stores. And then that chain closed down, and so I got involved with a couple other ventures, and then got into helping start a sport nutrition company called Champion Nutrition. Some of you may have heard of Champion. It's not as big as it used to be. It used to be a multi-million-dollar company, but it was sold, and I don't know what it's at now. But um, when we were at Champion and we were starting that program, there was some research from Russia that I was very interested in. It was on a compound called succinates, and the mineral succinates were things like potassium and magnesium succinic acid. And there was a researcher in Russia named Maria Kondrashova who was studying the succinates and their energetic potentials. And the folks at Champion, the people that started Champion Nutrition, were using them in one of their products. But I was interested in what the Soviet Union was doing with them. So I started to correspond with Dr. Kondrashova. And from that conversation, one thing led to another. There's my phone, thank you. Um, that I was very interested in learning more about what the Soviet Union was doing as far as research. And so I began to correspond with other scientists in Russia. And for a few months, I started to develop additional relationships in the Soviet Union with different scientists. The National Strength Coaches Association had a tour going through Bulgaria and Russia in 1988, and I hooked on with that group, and we went to Bulgaria for a week, and then we went to Russia, to Moscow for a week, and I again got to know additional scientists and coaches and whatnot. That was really an eye-opening trip because that was my first time to the Soviet Union. I've been many times to Russia since, but it really opened my eyes to kind of what they were doing. You know, that in the late 80s and even in the 90s, there was kind of this mystique of what the Soviet Union athletes were using, and you know, we're talking the drug side, but also the nutrition side. So I got firsthand um, meetings with a lot of different coaches and scientists while I was on my trip to Russia. And then, good thing about it was that the NSCA had a lot of coaches, which is great. But I was the only guy that was really interested in the nutrition side and the restoration side. So I got kind of some priority treatment. I was invited to a round table of scientists discussing performance enhancing nutrients and whatnot, and got to meet some additional folks. Also in the same year, I was invited to attend an international symposium in Leningrad, Russia, with some very, very well-known scientists, and again gained further experience with the Soviet program from that. There were a lot of scientists from around the world that were there, including Eric Haltman, and Eric was one of the pioneers in the creatine monohydrate research. If you know anything about creatine monohydrate, he was pretty much a pioneer of that nutrient. So, but then I went many other times, worked with a lot of scientists and coaches there. And then we got involved in developing nutritional products in the United States, further kind of using the Soviet concept of different nutrients and whatnot. And then lately, I've been kind of re-energized to work in the sport nutrition area. For a number of years, I was working more in the anti-aging health area of nutrition science. So the last year or so, I've been kind of energized, and the reason I've been energized is because there's a lot of new science that has come out and internationally that's been published that kind of supports a lot of the science that the Soviets were using in the early days. So and the raw materials today that are available are also, the quality of them is a lot better than they ever have been before. So I started to do more research in performance enhancing nutrients for athletes just the last year. I was invited to write a book lately on ergogenics for athletes. I chose ergogenics for explosive athletes. Most of the athletes that I have worked with over the years have been in explosive sports, not as much bodybuilding, although I have worked with bodybuilders, and I certainly have worked with endurance athletes, long distance cyclists, for instance. But most of the athletes I've worked with have been in sports like football and track and field and baseball and basketball and those types of sports, Olympic weightlifting as well. So I was fortunate to work with some very elite athletes and teams. I worked with some athletes that were with the Arizona Diamondbacks the year they won the World Series, and worked with some of the athletes with the Green Bay Packers the year they won the Super Bowl. So that was a lot of fun, and I kind of miss that. So I've been kind of refocused on developing and working on understanding nutrients for explosive athletes, which really is different if you think about it. Bodybuilding nutrition's been around a long time, and as an athlete in college, I was a hammer thrower, and I really didn't take anything. In my day, there was some protein powders; they didn't taste very good. A little bit of amino acid type products, caffeine was around, things like that. But I just ate well and competed. So today it's quite different. There's so many different products to select. Again, a lot of them come out of kind of the bodybuilding arena, and protein synthesis and muscle building is important, obviously, even for an explosive athlete. But it's really important to look at the neuromuscular side of performance and look at what kinds of nutrients can amplify the training result in the explosive traits, things like reaction, starting power, speed, maximal speed, striking force, and then of course speed endurance. So those are really traits that are more appropriate for explosive athletes. And bodybuilders just, it's not of interest to them. They don't need it. They get on the stage and flex, and they're pretty much done. Endurance athletes have again another metabolic process that they utilize. So we're really looking at ATP and phosphocreatine and glycogen. It's kind of the main things in speed strength sports. Most speed strength sports are very quick, very very short acting. There's not a lot of endurance involved. Even in an NFL game, I was kind of researching it and was surprised to learn that the typical NFL game, the amount of play during the game is actually about 11 minutes of total play time. And so the average play is about 4.8 seconds. So it's not long. And so when I look at developing and researching different nutrients to enhance athletic performance, I really look at what types of training the athletes are doing. It's very important because the supplements support the training. It's not the other way around. But the nutrition industry is kind of more involved in selling a supplement first, and then good luck with the training. I've always taken the approach that the training is the primary driver, and then from the training we look at what kinds of supplements can amplify the training result, enhance recovery, and then improve the adaptive response to the training. All training is a stress, so really what we're trying to do is optimize the adaptation to that stress, and the supplements have got to complement that, not deter from it. In sport nutrition today, though, there are many, many different ingredients, and it's very confusing to athletes with all the different ingredients and products that are on the market. Many of the ingredients that are used now are kind of evolved from the nutrition health side, things that are like antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin E and whatnot. And I wrote about in my book about those, and I call them actually disadaptive nutrients, because the new science shows that many antioxidants actually deter the adaptive response. They blunt the response. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because training is a stress itself. When an athlete trains explosively, they are producing things during the training like free radicals, like reactive oxygen, reactive nitrogen. They're producing heat shock proteins, and they're producing cytokines. And all those things could be considered a negative in some instances, and certainly in excess they would be a negative. But in training, they're positive, because those are the signaling molecules, signaling mechanisms that actually amplify the training effect. That's how adaptation occurs. The body, kind of in a simplistic form, says, hey, I don't like what you just did to me. I'm going to get stronger, quicker, more reactive, whatever it is. So the training is creating the stress. The supplements that are used should be amplifying the restorative process to maximize the adaptive response. And so I've always taken a different view than a lot of people have. I'm not really big on pre-workout supplements. I know they're a big thing today, and there's a lot of pre-workout products on the market. One would intuitively think that, yeah, I want to take this because it's going to enhance my performance during my exercise. It's going to make me do more, and blah, blah, blah. In a competitive situation, that may be true, and I may use things in competition that would not be used during training. But in training, what I've always worked towards with athletes is to make their training as hard as possible and create the greatest stress as possible without overtraining. In other words, we call it overreaching. So we want to overreach. We want to take the athlete beyond where they're at. That requires certain stress. If you introduce certain nutrients at that time that blunt that, or that make it easier, then the adaptive response is slowed down. So we want it to be very intense during the training. In recovery, which is more where I focus, and again, this is based more on the Soviet side of the research. I was educated basically from many, many trips to Russia and collaborating over the years with Russian scientists. So my background is really in the adaptive restorative response pathways. So the supplements today, a lot of them coming out of the bodybuilding market, they have many ingredients. Some of them, if you go into GNC and other outlets, and I work with retailers also. I work with the Whole Foods market quite a bit out here. You'll see many multiple ingredients in these products, and it's kind of overkill. I've made the mistake in the past too. I've what I call over-engineered a product to where you start to add things, and you muddy its effect to enhance adaptation because it has so many different ingredients. Some of them may work, some of them not. Some of them counter the other ingredients. I mentioned the antioxidants earlier. A lot of the products today have vitamin C. Everybody throws C in everything. If you can think about where C is today, vitamin C is in our smart water, it's in our cereal, it's in our nutrition bar, it's in our drinks, it's in our powders. So that is something that I don't add to products because the C has been shown to actually reduce the adaptive response. And so I recommended to athletes in my new book to not take additional amounts of antioxidant nutrients, vitamin C, vitamin E. And a lot of the research that's been done over the years, for instance with vitamin E, has been both positive and negative. And the question is, well, why in one study is it positive and why in one study is it negative? Because, well, it depends on the people that were studied in the research, but also the type of vitamin E. I mean, there are 8 isomers of vitamin E, and then the dosage of things. There's a process in health and medicine now called Hormesis. Hormesis has been around for a long time, but lately it's kind of had a resurgence. It simply means that Hormesis means that something in a small dose can be beneficial, but in a larger dose is actually harmful. So what that means, if you think about everything that we do pretty much in life, is something has to be in the right zone to elicit the right response. Training is a good example. training would be considered hormetic in my opinion. Training has to be in a certain amount of volume and intensity for that individual. As the person becomes more experienced, then you raise those types of things, volume, intensity, types of exercise and whatnot, to create additional stress. But if you overreach that, for instance, if you've never run a lot of distance before, and I said to you, and I don't run a ton, I do more high intensity interval training. But if I was to say to you, well, let's go to the wall in the room there and touch the wall and come back, well, that's a great workout. Well, obviously that wasn't enough to do anything, right? If I said to you, well, let's go run 150 miles right now. I don't know about you, but to me that would be excessive. They'd probably find me on the pavement somewhere, a big blob of goo. So there's obviously a zone of stress that we all need to be under. In nutrition, the same thing applies. That the nutrient has to be in a certain hormetic zone. There's two main pathways that I address in a book that I finished recently. One, you may have heard of this. It's becoming more common and kind of in the nutrition industry, more of a buzzword, but it's called the mTOR pathway, mammalian target of rapamycin, and it's really the main anabolic pathway. I refer more to mTOR-C1 because that's the main anabolic pathway, but mTOR-C1 is the pathway that involves muscle growth. It's very energy dependent, and it needs proteins and other things, but that's the main pathway that allows us to build proteins in the body. So not only muscle proteins, but enzymes and things like that. Athletes are always so concerned with skeletal muscle protein, and that's important, but enzymes are proteins too, and those need to be ramped up as well to improve performance. So mTOR is one pathway, and its opposite. If you're looking at it like a seesaw, and one person was sitting on one bench of the seesaw and one person on the other side of the seesaw is another pathway called AMPK, and this involves nutrient AMP from ATP processing. So when energy is expended, more ATP is raised, and the AMPK pathway is activated. It's more involved in mitochondria, building mitochondria activity and quantity as well. And endurance athletes tend to build the AMPK pathway, because if you think about endurance athletes, they're very efficient at burning fat, and so AMPK is raised highly in those athletes. In sedentary individuals that are overweight, over fat, it's an advantage to build the AMPK pathway as well. And so how do you do that? How do you build these pathways? So you look at AMPK and we look at mTOR. So let's address AMPK first. It is a pathway that is activated through energy scarcity. There's three things that can basically build AMPK. One is fasting or reducing calories. The body basically senses, hey, I don't have any energy, I don't have as much ATP as I had, I've got more AMPK, it activates the AMPK pathway. So short-term intermittent fasting can be very beneficial, even to an athlete especially an athlete that's overweight, to do some short-term intermittent fasting. What is that? It's not long-term fasting. Fasting tends to shut down the metabolic rate if it's excessive, but short-term fasting would be like maybe just not eating for half a day, or missing 1 day of eating in a week. Those are intermittent fastings, and those can actually be beneficial, and those can raise AMPK. Second thing that will raise AMPK is exercise. Endurance exercise definitely does it, but more efficiently, high-intensity interval exercise does it. In track we used to call it fartlek training, or you sprint followed by a jog followed by a sprint. And I've used that myself and experimented with others on that. The science is now showing that high-intensity interval training is very efficient, especially with sedentary individuals, at burning body fat, improving muscle sensitivity to insulin, because when AMPK pathway is raised, the mitochondria are more active. They burn very clean, they burn efficiently, When they burn clean, they produce less free radicals. They spin off less free radicals. And so fat burning, allowing the body to burn more fat is a very important thing, not only for sedentary individuals, but for athletes as well, especially heavy overweight athletes. There's not obviously a lot of overweight athletes. Most sports athletes are pretty lean. But athletes that I've worked with before, like NFL players, some of them could be pretty robust as far as carrying body fat. So at times we will use the AMPK processes to raise AMPK with those athletes. The third thing that can raise AMPK are certain nutrients. Mostly are polyphenols, which are from plants. Polyphenols are things generally of color in plants, things like the red of a raspberry or the blue of a blueberry or purple of an acai berry or whatnot. So polyphenols are actually made by plants as a stress response chemicals. Plants can't pick up and move if they're under stress. They've got to stay there and tough it out. They've got to get creative. So plants are constantly adapting to their environment. Stress that a plant can be under could be low water stress, could be high heat, could be high water stress even, could be insect damage. Bug starts chewing on the leaf or the root of a plant, and so the plant will actually make a natural insecticide, and those natural insecticides are polyphenols. And so, you probably are aware that a lot of health supplements have polyphenols in them. Things like grapeseed extract is a polyphenol. What other ones? Green tea, blueberry I mentioned, acai berry, and many others that are in nutritional supplements are based on polyphenols. Turmeric is one of my favorites, and it's a polyphenols produced by turmeric plants that are make curcuminoids, good for anti-inflammation. So these stress response compounds that the plants make, these polyphenols, are actually hormetins. Again, Hormesis being something in a small dose is beneficial, but in a high dose is toxic. So when we use them in nutrition, we really have to be careful about how much we use, when we use them, because they are toxins to us as well. Plant makes them as a toxin to the insects, for instance, that chew on it. But when we consume them, because we're so tied to plants in our evolution, we receive them as a stress response signal. So the blue of a blueberry, when people in industry or scientists sometimes talk about them, and lay people talk about them, they often talk about a blueberry, the blue of a blueberry, or a blueberry in particular, as an antioxidant, or the raspberries as antioxidants or something like that. Apple skin is an antioxidant or something. But those are actually not antioxidants in the body. They have very minimal antioxidant influence. Well, what they do is they create a stress response in the body. So when they create the stress response, our body adapts to that by ramping up very specific antioxidant and detox pathways. One is called NRF2. And this pathway produces antioxidant and detox enzymes that are very powerful and very protective to the body. But it does so to adapt to a stressor, not that the antioxidant itself is doing the work. The antioxidants are produced in this pathway. You've probably heard of some of them, like catalase and glutathione and SOD, things like that. There's many others that are very important to health. So a lot of my research in the last, decade has been on understanding these compounds in the health side. But they can be also appropriate for athletes to actually raise the AMPK pathway, because they kind of create some kind of a stress signal that turns on AMPK as well. How are we doing on time here? We're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and if you want to interject or anything, just interject. I'm really looking at the screen, looking at the camera more than I am you guys, but feel free to interject. As far as mTOR, because athletes are more interested in muscle growth, mTOR is also activated by a few things, the same three things basically: nutrition, calories, for instance. When we fast during the AMPK pathway, the mTOR pathway is built up through calories and through protein. mTOR itself is a growth pathway. So we have to be a little bit careful how we define growth. Athletes, of course, want to talk about muscle growth, but mTOR is also activated by just eating massive amounts of calories. So a very large, obese person is also very mTOR rich, obviously in the negative way. So, if we want to target muscle building, skeletal muscle building, for instance, for athletic performance, we want to build muscle and enzymes that work those processes. So that absolutely has to have some kind of training introduction as well. And then the types of nutrients, obviously, that we're going to consume are not just simply calories, but they're very focused calories. Fats, carbs, proteins, but especially proteins. Protein is very essential to turning on mTOR. In particular, one primary amino acid in proteins, the amino acid leucine, is very important in switching on the mTOR pathway. This has been studied for a long time now, and it's very important. So I utilize whey protein a lot in my programs with athletes because I think it's a very efficient protein. It's very high in L-leucine. The vegetarian proteins are not as high. Some companies have added additional branched chain amino acids, and L-leucine is one of those to amplify veggie protein effects. But L-leucine is very high in whey, so I utilize it a lot. Whey's pretty friendly for most people. It tastes good. It mixes well. It can be flavored or unflavored. I usually use unflavored because I like to kind of mix and match and add berries to it or whatever to flavor it. But as far as getting enough protein in the diet to switch on the mTOR pathway, leucine and specifically whey protein is very efficient. The timing of protein for athletes is very important too. Over the years, athletes have kind of been told that there's like this magic anabolic window where you've got to get protein in quickly after a workout, for instance, to build muscle. It's somewhat accurate, but not really, because recent research with protein synthesis, it's done by some very, very good laboratories, especially in England, have shown that the protein building process after, for instance, resistance training is elevated for quite a while after the exercise. There's actually a latent period or a slowdown period of about half an hour to an hour after exercise where the body is still transitioning from a catabolic process to an anabolic process. And so at that point, it's really not even critical, even in a half an hour, to introduce proteins at that point. But to get them in maybe a half an hour after the workout. And then the next question is, well, what quantity of protein does one want to take? So I've seen a lot of these protein powders in the stores that have serving sizes of 30 grams, 40 grams, or whatnot. The recent research has shown that in most cases, 20 grams of whey protein, which includes 10 grams of essential amino acids, in other words, those amino acids that we can't make ourselves, 10 grams, is really the maximum amount that most people can use at one time to build skeletal muscle proteins. So if we look at 20 grams as our kind of a ceiling dose, there's a process called muscle full that Dr. Michael Rennie from England had coined. That basically, when he studied it, he was looking at different amounts of protein and how they improved protein synthesis. And he found, in fact, that about 20 grams was the ceiling limit. What happens if you take 30 grams or 40 grams? Well, 30 grams or 40 grams really turns into energy. The body can utilize it. It just doesn't make muscle proteins at that point with it. It will burn it as fuel. So knowing that whey protein, for instance, is not cheap, it's probably smarter to just take in, if you want energy, take in some carbs or something like that for additional energy. So 20 grams of protein at any one time, what we call a bolus, would be very efficient. And then the next question is, well, when can I do it again? Can I amplify the result? I took I worked out really hard. I did a heavy weightlifting session. I've given myself a half an hour, and now I'm taking in a protein drink. Got 10 grams of essential amino acids, 20 grams total in there. Can I do it again? The answer is yes. But there is a window, there's a time lapse for that before the body will be receptive again to additional proteins. And that time lapse seems to be about 3 hours. So you could introduce another, say, 20-gram amount within 3 hours. Can you do that again and again? Yeah, there's probably a law of diminishing returns, but it's also now recognized that anabolic activity, muscle building, is actually elevated for about 24 hours after a strength workout. So there's quite a long time there to introduce protein. It's just that you probably want to spread it out. So that's the TOR pathways as far as the nutrition side of the TOR pathway. There are other ingredients on the nutrition side other than just, let's say, whey protein or branched chain amino acids or whatever that will raise mTOR. I've done some research on that. Two of them that I like are glycine betaine or trimethylglycine. Glycine betaine seems to raise mTOR as well. I've used that a number of years. I honestly didn't use that because I really knew a whole lot about it. I knew it was anabolic because I saw the results, but I really didn't know the mechanism at the time. The Soviet scientists and athletes were using it. They were using it on Soviet athletes, and so I began using it on Western athletes. Trimethylglycine. But recent research has shown that it actually performs in the mTOR pathway. So, and then another one is mineral orotates. Orotic acid is a specific acid that seems to increase mTOR as well. So there's a few things that will raise that. Of course, then we talked about exercise on the AMPK pathway. Obviously, exercise is very important on the mTOR pathway. What kind of exercise is that? That's strength training, some kind of resistance training with high muscle, very intense muscle contractions. Those raise mTOR as well. A new compound that was recently researched for muscle growth is called phosphatidic acid, or PA. This is a nutrient that's not on the market yet. It will be soon. Phosphatidic acid is actually produced by muscles during muscle contractions, and it signals the mTOR pathway very nicely. So some of the recent research has been done by giving athletes some phosphatidic acid, about 750 milligrams a day in the recent studies, and they showed very effective at raising the mTOR pathway. So that's an area that I'm going to explore further. It's an exciting new nutrient that I think can have, it's a very safe nutrient. It's been studied very extensively, made by an Italian company. They have a license for it, patent on it, I think. So it'll be probably on the market very soon, I'm sure. But it's a signaling molecule, basically. Because exercise, again, is signaling something to happen. Again, back to these signaling molecules like free radicals, heat shock proteins, inflammatory and non-inflammatory cytokines that are produced during muscle contractions, muscle effort, are signals to the body to adapt. And so they're important, and then the phosphatidic acid would probably be along that same line of doing some kind of a signal that signals mTOR to build more muscle strength. So that's the mTOR pathway. Do you have any questions from anybody yet?
Yeah, I think we might. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
Yeah. I took a quick look at your book that you just released, and
Joseph sent me some of the pages.
Oh, good. Okay.
Obviously, like, all the stuff in there makes sense. Otherwise, you wouldn't write about it. So, how do you decide, out of all those ergogenics, which one you would use for an athlete?
In the back, in the end of the book, I did some kind of prescriptions or some kind of scenarios to them. You've kind of got to look at what kind of training you're doing. Are you in a cycle where you want to build, maximal strength, muscle mass, things like that. Those are the kind of the purely anabolic side of nutrition, and those are going to be things like the whey proteins, trimethylglide, things that switch on mTOR. In other words, that's purely an mTOR pathway. So you're going to want to look at nutrients that are going to switch on mTOR. Um, uh, Mineral orotates, bisphosphatidic acid. Those are types of things that I would target for that. But obviously, explosive athletes have other traits that they need to build: reaction, quickness. Those are neuromuscular, and so there are other nutrients that are involved in the neuromuscular side. The ones that I've used with very good results have been things like alpha GPC, which is for maintaining acetylcholine levels in the synapse, and then huperzine A, which is an acetylcholine esterase inhibitor. We've used with great effects over the years, and so the question is, what kind of training am I in? Like I said before, and initially when I was saying, I always look at the training first. What is an athlete trying to do? What is their training involved? And then adapting the nutrients to that. So any nutrient in the book. I talk about cell energetics in the book too. There are certain compounds that improve energy. I didn't really mention creatine so far, but creatine is an excellent nutrient just for strength building and performance enhancement. I've used it for many years, just the creatine monohydrate form. I don't like a lot of the other forms that are out there. A lot of them are made really for more marketing purposes than they are for function. Some company has selling creatine monohydrate, and another company says, well, we want to make make a little more money on it, so let's make some unique thing, and let's only make a different type of creatine and put it on the market. But most of those have been studied and have not shown to be any better than creatine monohydrate. So those kinds of things, you would look at the training first. Any other questions?
I would have follow-up. Or does anybody else have a question?
I kind of would like him just to talk about like the anti-inflammatory response, because like that's a pretty. I kind of want to just know your view on like the anti-inflammatory response, because obviously, like with inflammation, that can inhibit performance. And if there's any, like I know Matt's talked to the basketball team about a couple different supplements that might help. I was just wondering what your take is on like the more natural supplements like fish oils and stuff.
Well,
Great question. Go ahead.
To give you a little bit of background too, our basketball court is pretty much wood over cement, and it's very hard. And so we're talking about reducing types of inflammation like joint stiffness and joint pain. And I've looked at fish oil and MSM, so I don't know what your thoughts are on those.
Okay, yeah, good question. I didn't mention fish oil, but in the book I wrote about fish oil. And I didn't write about it actually for inflammation, although it certainly is appropriate for that. I wrote about it because of its anabolic activity and its neuromuscular activity. I've been using fish oil with athletes for many years now, and in fact, I think I started using it back in 1990 when the fish oil really wasn't very popular yet. And the reason I used it was not for inflammation, but for reaction. Fish oil, omega-3, which is really what you're talking about in fish oil, EPA and DHA that are in fish oil, are really what you want to look at. And EPA and DHA in the Western diet are very low. So knowing that, athletes probably are not getting much of that as well as the general population. Not eating a lot of fatty fish, for instance, or whatever. I thought at that point in the 90s that athletes would do well on fish oil because cell structures need omega-3s to communicate and to perform optimally. And if you have excessive amounts of omega-6, omega-6 pathway converts ultimately to arachidonic acid, which is very inflammatory. So you want to blunt that. So I introduced it really for its kind of performance enhancing effect. But in addition to that, it does have anti-inflammatory effects. So I think as far as the primary, your answer to your question and what you're already looking at, fish oil is a great addition. MSM probably too. MSM would be appropriate. Sulfur, MSM is sulfur. Glucosamine sulfate, chondroitin sulfate, probably a sulfur compound in there that's actually improving joint health. Those two are fine. There are other things that are anti-inflammatory, like some of the polyphenols, specifically one in turmeric called the curcuminoids. You may have heard of it. Turmeric is a very popular ingredient in anti-inflammatory natural products. So it can be beneficial for athletes that have inflammation. There is a kind of a caveat to that, though, that because the polyphenols oftentimes turn on the AMPK pathway, that they can interfere with the mTOR pathway. Well, there's a balance between all of this, but obviously, if inflammation is excessive, some of these nutrients probably could be useful. Boswellia, turmeric, grapeseed extract, even a little alpha-lipoic acid possibly, but those are kind of really have to be taken carefully. Because I wouldn't give them to a normal athlete, an athlete that wasn't really under a lot of inflammatory stress load, because I would be hesitant that it might interfere with their adaptive response, their anabolic response. But for athletes like that you have that are on basketball court that are pounding, that have all that shock and that stress, probably can be useful for that. It's just a thought. I don't know.
Especially during the in-season period, then.
Yeah, probably more so as they get in and they get really. And this is very important in all sports. In football, in baseball, basketball, and all sports. At the end of the season, you're beat up, especially when you have so many games, and there's a lot of trauma, and really you're just trying to hold on. You're trying to hold it all together and ride through. So you're not really in a building process at that point. You've done all that in your preseason and early season work, and so now it's a matter of holding on. So I think you're right. I think that's probably a better time to ramp that up a little bit as far as those nutrients. So yeah, fish oil, MSM, boswellia, turmeric. Polyphenols, though, are very interesting. And so many products today are not very effective because they may have the polyphenols in them. They may have like a turmeric. You can go to the health food store and see turmeric, or sometimes it's called curcumin or curcuminoids. That's the active in it. It's a yellow spice in curry. There's a lot of products that are in capsules, for instance, that can be very, very useful. But most of them are not very efficient because turmeric itself and many polyphenols are. Resveratrol is another one. Resveratrol is recently researched as kind of a longevity nutrient and how does it do that? It turns on AMPK. It actually improves mitochondrial activity very, very efficiently. But all those polyphenols are very poorly absorbed by the body. I think they're poorly absorbed by the body because the body really doesn't like them. They're hormetic. They're toxic, and so the body says basically, look, I don't want to take in a lot of that stuff, whatever it is. So to get more of it in there, you have to have a delivery system that allows that. One that I use and have had good results with, and it is complementary, is a compound from black pepper called piperine. And in the nutrition industry, it's a branded product called Bioperine, made by a company called Sabinsa. And piperine is what it does is it activates the villi in the intestines, the little fingers that we have in our intestines that increase the surface area. It activates those and makes them more receptive to the nutrients. So, as an example, I saw a study recently on resveratrol showing that its oral absorption, its bioavailability, orally was almost zero, but with piperine, it increased it 100 times, which is huge. And I've used pretty much bioperine with that. So if you want to do You can buy bioprene by itself too. I take it myself. I take usually a 10 milligram tablet. Buy them. It's very inexpensive by itself, and it just allows some of these other compounds to be absorbed very well. I don't know if it has any. Might have an effect a little bit on fish oil too, but certainly the polyphenols. So absorption is important too. Any other questions on
Okay.
any of those areas? Inflammation. Maybe I could probably handle anything you want to ask me.
Anybody else? Do you want to ask your follow-up question, Ron? Okay, just right in here.
So you said earlier vitamin C and E, they actually inhibit the stress response, so it's not a good idea to take it as an athlete?
Yeah, there's a lot of new research, and I added a bunch of it in the book because and I didn't know this at all either until I mean I've kind of intuitively stayed away from things that make life easy for athletes. Training is designed to make life hard for athletes, and so I'm really hesitant all the time on introducing something. I call them the goodies. You can introduce goodies like, for instance, caffeine. Caffeine is a performance enhancing nutrient. I wouldn't use it during training. I would only use it during competition because it's making training easy or changing it. Maybe I wouldn't certainly do it during competition solely. Probably I would use it somewhat during training, at least to the body to get used to it and kind of see how it responds to it, so that when I went into training, I wasn't like, my body wasn't shocked or I had a bad effect from it. But I wouldn't use it as a consistent thing. So the same goes for antioxidants. And probably zinc and selenium and those types of things. Other antioxidants also that would have probably a negative influence on training in some instances would be things like lipoic acid. I mentioned lipoic acid for inflammation, but I think some of those can be detrainers, especially early on in a season. They could take away from the training result. So the research has shown that they're disadaptive nutrients. So is vitamin C important in the body? Yeah, we need some vitamin C. But do we need 500 milligrams or 300 milligrams or whatever? The answer is probably not. For our normal health, we probably need 60 milligrams to 120 milligrams. Maybe an athlete, maybe a little bit more. But it's more of a word of caution to athletes to be very careful about, because we get these antioxidants from so many sources today. We need a nutrition bar. We got some in there. We eat some cereal. We got some. We eat our normal food. We've got some in there. So and then we get a drink, a powdered drink or something, a performance drink, and all of a sudden there's 100 milligrams of it in there. I mean, I've seen so many of even the products on the nutrition side. I really have a hard time with, because they they add all these great polyphenols to their product, and then all of a sudden they've added C to it. I'm like, why do you really need to do that? You want to turn on certain pathways. I'm very pathway oriented in my research. I want to look at really, when I wrote the book, it was really what's called nutrigenomic, how nutrients turn on genes. And so we want to turn on certain genetic pathways, and we want to turn off other pathways. In the case of your basketball players that have been training all season long, now you want to turn off the inflammatory pathway somewhat towards the end of the season, because it's very destructive. And so we're always trying to turn on certain pathways or turn off other pathways. And these antioxidants, well, it sounds good, need to be in a certain zone that they can be healthy, but not detract from the training result. Even in cancer research, and people that are going on chemotherapy medications, they're oftentimes not told not to take antioxidants, because it detracts from the effect of the cancer. And yet, some of the polyphenols that are added to some cancer treatments have been shown to be synergistic, to allow the individual to improve their health, but use lower medicine, lower cancer drugs, because they're synergistic. So it's kind of wide open as far as how much of certain nutrients are needed, and that's where That's where the new science is really helping us a lot. Science of nutrition has exploded in the last 10 years. I often cite examples. I can go online and look at the different published studies since the 1960s on almost any topic, and you'll find pretty much that over half of all the science on that topic has been done and published in just the last 10 years. And why is that? Well, the internet allows scientists to communicate much more than they ever have in the past. I mean, huge amounts of communication and collaboration today. I could talk to a scientist in Russia at an institute in Russia just in one day. In the old days, I'd have to send a telex or hope that a fax would go through. And sometimes the Soviet phone systems, faxes weren't very easy to get through, or I'd have to visit. So those are really slow. Today it's speeded up so much that we're seeing a lot more sharing of knowledge, and that's kind of what I've tried to bring to the forefront in the book, is to put that new science out there. And most of it in the book, if you see it, the references in it, and I wrote it. I didn't put the references in the back. I put the references in the body of the sections I was writing, because I thought that somebody really wants, if somebody's reading about, say, phosphatidic acid, or reading about creatine monohydrate or whatever, and there's the science, there's the reference that I'm citing there. And did I cite them? Did I put them all in there? No, I have thousands of them. To make this book, I probably reviewed, I don't know, probably 2,000 different studies just to kind of get a feel. You have to read a lot of studies to kind of make a call on how a nutrient is going to respond. Who is it going to respond to? Who's going to respond to the nutrient? What's it going to do? What kind of dosage? When do you use it? All of those things really need to be answered to maximize the efficiency of some of these nutrients. So that's what I try to present in the book. Yeah.
I hate to cut you off, but that's the end of our class time, and these guys got to get to their classes. But I'm sure we'll have some follow-up questions if you don't mind. I can email them to you if you don't mind answering a couple. But thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Good to have you. Bye.
Appreciate it. And guys, we'll meet again in here on Wednesday.
Oh, I'm in the memes, so I mean.
Yeah.
I didn't like.
It's an hour and 20 minutes there, and it took me over 2 hours.
Okay. That's fine.
I
Jake said he was going to be gone today too, right? Jake.
Oh, did I don't know, I did.
Yeah. All right.
Maybe being in the gym.
Huh?